as both Trump-deranged Democrats and never-Trump Republican hawks teamed up to attack Sen. Rand Paul, our Kentucky, this week over his trip to Russia, many believing it was a temporary stunt to defend President Trump post-Helsinki. The Washington Examiner reported Thursday that the senator had actually been planning this trip for some time. According to sources, Paul's trip has been in the works for nearly 6 months and supported by Trump team, the Washington Examiner's Paul Bidar reported. So if Paul's Russia excursion was some transparent last-minute photo op, as his critics say it is, why did he plan his trip last winter? If Paul's Trump-obsessed critics would take off their crazy goggles a minute, the answer becomes clear. The libertarian-leaning Republican has long had a consistent vision of what he believes foreign policy should look like, including U.S.-Russia relations. In what many observers considered his first major foreign policy speech in 2013, at a time when the senator was rumored to be considering a presidential run, Paul told the Heritage Foundation, President Ronald Reagan pulled no punches in telling Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall. He did not shy from labeling the Soviet Union an evil empire. But he also sat down with Gorbachev and negotiated meaningful reductions in nuclear weapons. A year later, presenting the case for conservative realism at the Center for the National Interest in 2014, Paul was critical of Russian President Vladimir Putin's intervention in Ukraine and supported U.S. sanctions on Russia, but also stressed the indispensable necessity of engaging foreign countries, even those perceived as enemies. Vox's Zach Beauchamp wrote of Paul's 2014 talk, Rand Paul just gave one of the most important foreign policy speeches in decades. Beauchamp said of the senator's realist foreign policy views, Paul is signaling that, when he runs for president in 2016, he isn't going to move toward the Republican foreign policy consensus, he's going to run at it with a battering ram. Beauchamp would add, if he wins, he could remake the Republican Party as we know it, indeed. But of course, Rand Paul didn't win. Trump did. Still, many say that today Trump is remaking the Republican Party, including on foreign policy. Many have noted the similarities and overlap between Trump's foreign policy impulses and Paul's long-standing positions. If the dots still aren't connected for some, let me be more explicit. Paul was in Russia not to do Trump or Putin or anyone else's bidding, but to encourage precisely the kind of engagement and diplomatic relations he would have pursued if he had become president. A senator well known for demanding congressional declarations of war, opposing NATO expansion, criticizing sending U.S. military aid abroad, and being against arming radical Islamic terrorists or rebels, is simply rounding out the important diplomatic ingredient of his overall realist foreign policy vision. With Russia right now, thanks to this president, a better diplomacy is possible. With another Republican president in the far more hawkish conventional GOP of recent years, it likely wouldn't be possible, as Beauchamp rightly noted. Why wouldn't the realist Paul make the most of this historic opportunity to encourage engagement? Washington Post reporter Karun Demirjian guided right Wednesday with this headline, Trump challenges traditional GOP antipathy to Russia, and Rand Paul is an ally. The question is which faction of the GOP will prevail, those like Sen. John McCain, RIs, who advocate a clenched-fist approach toward the Kremlin, especially as the dispute over Russia's interference in the 2016 election intensifies, or those endorsing Trump's efforts to establish more friendly relations, despite the warnings of the national security community. Demirjian added, a visit to Moscow this week by Sen. Rand Paul, our Kentucky, marked the sharpest endorsement yet of Trump's polarizing policy toward Russia. It's primarily polarizing because the national security community in Washington has long been more eager to take aggressive action than to engage in diplomacy. These are not only the same critics who blast Trump and Paul today as somehow betraying the U.S. for engaging Russia, but hawks in Reagan's time also criticized the GIPR harshly. National Review called his nuclear weapons reduction treaty, Reagan's suicide pact, for meeting with then-Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1986. Reagan understood that diplomacy was strength, not weakness. On Tuesday, Paul met with Mikhail Gorbachev. Paul said in a statement, President Gorbachev was instrumental in bringing down the Iron Curtain and restoring ties with the West. Our conversation further encouraged me that open dialogue between our two nations does not have to be a thing of the past. No, it doesn't. Hopefully President Trump will continue to pursue diplomatic relations with Russia and other nations. Americans interested in peace should hope Senator Rand Paul continues to pursue them too. Jack Hunter, at Jack Hunter 74, is a contributor to the Washington Examiner's Beltway Confidential blog. He is the former political editor of Rare.us and co-authored the 2011 book The Tea Party Goes to Washington with Sen. Rand Paul.